I have listed here 5 steps that we could use, tools based on this project. And of course, there are many other ways that we could use these tools, and we could use different tools, just like when you do maybe theory of change of an organization. There are many different ways that you can put together this theory of change. So it's the same using these tools. You can use different tools in different ways, in different contexts. So here I'm going to briefly discuss some what I think are kind of simple tools, but that can be extremely effective when we work in projects of any size in nature, really. So if you're, in this case, it's a kind of the project that requires a lot of reading of a lot of documents, but not only reading documents, but also finding these documents that might be in different data sets, might be in many different websites, and also in different formats like PDF, Word, maybe PowerPoint or Excel spreadsheets. So this could be potentially a very complex project to manage in terms of A, extracting, finding data or finding documents, and B, manage this data and eventually find what is relevant for your work and what's not. So in this kind of scenario, it's extremely useful to use some tools based on computer to help you to undertake this task. So the first one would be something that's called web scraping. So basically you go to a website, use an app or a program to do that, and this program is going to extract everything that might be relevant for you. So, for example, if you want to go to one of the, I don't know, UNICEF website, and you want to extract every single report that they have written in certain amount of time, you can use a web scrape to help you to collect this data. So this is, of course, something that can save you a huge amount of time, but also can help you to find documents that would otherwise be very difficult to find if you had to manually go to Google, search, and then go to website, and then on the website to try to find what is relevant for you. So web scraping works really well when the website is structured. So for example, a newspaper website, regardless of the newspaper, they have a number of similar or common features. And because they are kind of standard, it's very easy to extract data. So you can go, for example, The Guardian and extract every single article, and you can group them by authors, by date that it was published, by link, and have the actual content in like a big table. And of course, this is extremely useful also for data management. In some websites, in some contexts, it's a bit more difficult, especially if the websites are not well structured, but it's possible to do it. You know? So we have this web scraping for collecting, extracting the data. But what's going to happen, you're going to have a quite big number of things to read, and you want to find out actually what's relevant for you and what's not. So when you have a huge volume of document, you can use computer models to help you to navigate through these documents. And one thing that you could do is actually to produce a summary done by the computer of every single document. Of course, we know that some reports, they have the executive summary, but many other documents don't have it. So having a summary of everything that's there is extremely useful. And today there's a new kind of architecture called transformers, and they can actually produce very good summaries, which is very interesting because like 2 years ago the technology that we had didn't really produce good results in terms of summary, but now there's this big shift in natural language process, so now we can have quite good summaries done almost immediately just by using some computer models. And another good thing of these summaries is that you can choose the length of the summary. So you might want to just have maybe 2 lines to help you to decide if you're going to pay more attention to that document or not, or you can have something longer, like a couple of pages. And another very interesting tool that you can use based on computer is actually clustering the documents. So you're going to group them according to maybe some themes or according to anything that you might find relevant. And the interesting thing about clustering documents is that you can either choose maybe the themes. So let's say in your project that you're looking at interventions aimed at ending violence against women with disability. You can actually maybe choose some features that you want to group the projects by. I don't know, it could be type of intervention, could be the length, could be the budget of the project, or you can use the computer to come up with all these features. So the computer is going to run through the documents and see what it finds similar among these many documents and group them together. There are a number of projects and models that have done this for COVID. So there are many models that they have clustered academic papers on COVID, and this of course helps researchers, clinicians, companies to find exactly, or not exactly, but have a better idea of the kind of documents or the type of documents they're going to read in detail. And of course, you can also combine these two tools, and you can summarize them. You can also cluster them, so that makes things much easier for you when you go to actually read those reports that are relevant for your work. So building on the top of that, we can also classify the projects, because in this example, we are working with what works in terms of intervention. So you want to find out which interventions are more usually associated with certain outcomes. So in this case, you might want to look at some key variables like the budget, the length, the number of people that have been benefited, if it was the project only addressed women or if it addressed men as well, the type of intervention, the follow-up. So you want to find out all these key features from each project, and you want to see which ones tend to be associated with certain outcomes. So by doing so, you can have a much better idea of what works and in which context. And again, a computer model can help you to go through a document and to extract some of these features or these variables. It's interesting to note that even though the summary of a text is a much more complex task, to date summaries, they produce better results than this kind of extraction of information. You still can use the computer to do that, and actually in many cases it's the best approach, but you need also to have a researcher that's going to maybe to polish the finds, let's say. And once you have all these different projects, you know which ones you're going to read, you have the summary of them, and you have the key variables that are common to every project, and you know which outcomes are related to these key variables. You could also, and that's something additional, you could adapt this statistical technique, or at least the idea of this technique that's called principal component analysis, in which you're going to see if there are a few or maybe a couple of variables that are usually associated with certain outcomes, which is critical if you're working in a project like this first example, which is a review of effectiveness of interventions aimed at a certain topic. And another point that is of great importance of any project is actually disseminating the finds. Of course, there are a number of ways to do that. More traditional ways, like you can look for database or maybe websites or maybe journals that people working in the field might be accessing. But you can also look at different ways or more innovative ways to disseminate your findings. Again, there's a whole range of different things you could do, but one thing that I think it's quite good, quite interesting, and actually not too complex is look into platforms like Twitter and look how you could engage with people on Twitter and maybe find people who are more influential in the field or who write people who write messages that are more often liked or more often retweeted. So, and I even wrote like a short article about it. So you can actually use some fairly simple tools that help you not only to find maybe different groups of people who actually might be influential, even if they don't work for NGOs or if they are not specifically in the field, but people who might be happy or who might be already talking about this topic. And you can actually use this, by extracting the tweets and analyzing them, you can find maybe the people or the types of message that tend to be more influential. It of course can help you to tailor some of your message according to the group or the target that you have. You can also use some website analytics to find websites that might be good to disseminate your finds. And again, you can maybe go to kind of more traditional websites where NGO workers tend to visit, but you can also try to look for other websites that are popular for different reasons, but that might have an opening for the finds that you're trying to disseminate. Okay, so moving to example 2. So this is a much more practical example. So the idea is to provide the professional training to people with disabilities that live in a certain area. And in this case, it's the same as before. You could do the desk review and the review of literature using those different models that help her to extract, to manage, and also to summarize and cluster projects. One thing in this case that I would add is actually using some maps, and they can be very simple, like for example just getting a map from on Google Earth or maybe Google Maps, and just looking at the map first and trying to find out, to identify initially physical barriers that might impede or might make it difficult for people to access the place of training. But in addition to that, you can also look into actually barriers that are not physical. So in certain villages, especially when there's some sensitivity around ethnicity or religion or any other kind of background, some people might not be comfortable, for example, by maybe crossing a certain road or going to a certain area. This barrier might not be visible, but they might be barriers that actually affect the outcome and the delivery of your project. So that's something that could be plotted in the map. So either if you have information already from previous projects, from the census, or maybe if you need to do a quick survey, you can get this data and plot the linear map. And by doing that, it's much easier to understand the dynamics of the village, the dynamics of the place, and maybe rethink how you're going to deliver, in this case, the training. You might find out that actually having everybody coming, let's say, to the main hall of the village is not a great solution or not a great option, because this might exclude some people who don't be comfortable or might not have the means to get to this place. Having this mapping is something that can be extremely useful. So you understand the dynamics in visually, so they're in a physical place. You can also use mappings to help you to identify beneficiaries, because it's not uncommon for certain groups of people being maybe excluded, physically excluded from the village. So maybe they live a bit far away, or maybe they live far from the center or the market of the village. And maybe when you do a quick survey or a focus group discussion, these people, for any reason, might not be mentioned in these surveys. So by physically mapping them, you might be able actually to access these people and ensure that your project is actually reaching people who need this kind of service. So it's more likely to be, you're more likely to ensure equality of your project. Mapping can also help you to correlate maybe variables with possibly economic indicators, maybe livelihoods and other variables. So again, it's not uncommon to see places where the people who have a lower income, they live in areas that where access to water or maybe access to land is more difficult, or maybe they live in smaller plots of land. And this, of course, affects the possibility to generate and to have income. So there's a reinforcement between economic factors like income and also the geography of place. So again, correlating this to the mapping of the area can be extremely useful to have a better understanding of your beneficiaries, and actually even redesigning or designing your training according to these different needs. And and of course, and this is totally linked to how you design this intervention, but also how you implement it in kind of practical terms. And it helps you to, even if you have like a participatory method where you get a group of people that design the project together, by adding these two to this process, you can have a much better understanding of the whole context, which in turn is going to help you to design a project that's more likely to succeed. And also have information, this kind of information helps you to address problems as they come up. So up to now we have seen quite a few different tools. So they're kind of text analytics, which is called natural language processing. They are related to mapping. They are related to, in some cases, doing some statistical analysis, but also to data analytics and to data management. So all these tools that we have seen quickly so far, they are tools that are not going to increase massively your budget. They're not going to increase the length of your project, but they are tools that can actually have a huge impact in everything that's being done in relation to your project, in many different stages of the project cycle. So there are tools that are feasible. Some of them are very easy, like for example, you can even get a map on Google Maps, and if you don't want to use like Photoshop or anything like that, even pasting this map on let's say a Word document and just adding text box to it, that's an exercise that can be extremely useful, and of course it requires no technical expertise. In the other cases that we have seen so far, you need some expertise, but again, these are not expertise that will require a long time or a whole group of researchers to implement. These are things that are totally feasible, and again, they're not going to change massively the budget, the implementation, and the time frame of your project. So these are things that can very easily implemented. But also you can think about, and I'm going to mention one example just to finish this talk today, is you could think about more innovative ways to approach this. And one thing that I think it's extremely interesting, but it's not done very often certainly not done very often in the third sector, which is to create a computer simulation that will help you to understand possible scenarios or how things might turn out, or what are the possible outcomes of your project. So computer simulation is a field that's very well established in biology, in geomorphology, geography, physics, engineering. It's a field that in the social sciences is actually quite old, but it's much less powerful just because the nature of studying societies is way more complex than studying, for example, change in the landscape over time. But still, you can use a computer model to help you to look at different scenarios, or how likely different scenarios to happen in your project. So, for example, you might look at, okay, you're going to provide this training to this group of people. Are we going to face any kind of resistance of other people? Are they going to cooperate? Are they going to maybe be against it for any reason? So there are many different scenarios, and you can actually use a computer to help you to understand how these different scenarios might actually unfold. And if you do that, if you know that, you might be able to be prepared to find solutions to these things before they actually escalate or they scale up. So, as I said, they are not totally well established because they are not as powerful as they are in other disciplines. But I think there's a huge field there. There's a huge potential to start using these tools. And even if initially they make small contributions, it's very likely that the more you use, the more you learn about them, you will eventually be able to improve them to the point that where they can make significant changes or improvements in the projects that we might be working on.